genesis of the new consciousness paradigm. Again, Reverend Phil Valentine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, I'm not sure. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
I am. I'm on. Okay. It's on, huh? Well, give thanks and praises, and I want to give thanks to the Grassroots brothers and sisters for inviting me here. I'd like to preface my talk by saying, or at least saying a few words that has been inspired by a particular circumstance that took place last week. Now, all of you who know me and know the many years that I have been discoursing with my community and interfacing with my community, that when I do speak, I make sure that whatever subjects I speak on, I would give you points of reference, books and authors that you can go and check for yourself. And my tapes will bear me out when I say that I will tell and give the proper information to anyone, because I don't own the information. Now, I am prefacing this particular talk with love and respect, but because of what happened last week, it's necessary for me to say this. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a disciple, a student, or a prognosticator of the works or teachings of Dr. Malachi York. I must get that clear to the younger brothers and sisters, especially who don't know who I am. Because a few times in the past, a lot of them who come, who are just now getting on the path, just now awakening, don't understand the disciplines of research and what it takes for one who dedicates themselves to finding out the information no matter where it may lie. And most of the information that I've been speaking on for the last 20 years is information that is buried deep, purposefully, so that we as a people may not find the missing ingredient that connects us to the higher parts of ourselves. I am a researcher, metaphysician, and as such, I am a decoder. So I can tell you of about 3 or 4 of the top decoders that are with us, one of them being Bobby Hemmett, and he has no compunctions about telling you where his information is being touched upon or taken from, because he is using it that way as a result of the fact that most of our information is being disseminated through the Caucasoid, but with the missing ingredient. And what is that missing ingredient? Us. So we are interpreters / decoders of what it is that the dominant quote-unquote society is feeding us through the so-called New Age paradigm. Other decoders are Steve Coakley, Brother Dr. Delbert Blair. These are master decoders, ones who have helped us to sift through all of the BS and then give us the needs, or what we need, of that missing ingredient. So I'm not really focusing it on those of us who have been on this journey for a long time. I am actually putting this on tape now because I am sure that this tape will be disseminated amongst the community. And I said this because it dawned on me after the incident that took place at Long Island University last week, and we're here, what's the date today? December 7th. Last week, Friday, it took place, and there are members of the circle or the students of Dr. York that I meet every now and then in my lectures, and because of the subject matter that I speak on. They think that the subject matter originates with Dr. Malachi York, and it doesn't. I tell them where they may go directly to find that material. Now that sets a confusion, a paradigm of confusion and a confusion premise. If information is only being given from the ingredient only and not letting the brothers and sisters who don't understand how that information came to be, or are not given at least some form of history or some form of breadcrumbs to follow. So they believe that the information originates and ends with the person who teaches them, because they are confined within a particular constraint of consciousness. That is not me. I'm about breaking ceilings. And I don't care where I get the information from, because I know it all originates from one source. So I'm saying that with love and respect. And I'm going to say this for maybe about the next 3 to 4, maybe to 7 tapes or dissertations that I do, so that when these tapes are disseminated, it is understood that Dr. Malachi York does not hold a complete and total hold over the information that the brother disseminates, and that we share a common path. Check? All right. Give thanks. Now I want to use that as a segue into defining and giving a more rounded perception to why it is I wanted to speak about how it is we are being taught today, and how this so-called miseducation system got its beginning in the first place, and why it is that the system of ignorance has been so successful. I have some materials here that deals with the education system that is currently the education system used in the United States of America. This system is a derivative of the Prussian system of education. Prussian being the German system of education. Now, when the Prussians lost to Napoleon, the generals found that the reason why they lost wasn't because they weren't good soldiers. It was because everybody was thinking for themselves. Everybody was too well educated. They didn't know how to follow orders. So after that, the brainwaves and the elite, the aristocracy, began to introduce a certain education pattern to the next generations. They began to limit or put a ceiling on causing a flourishing of intelligence. When you read too much, you begin to want to inquire more. But they set it up so well that what you do read confines you anyway, because you don't believe there's anything beyond that. Now, when they did that, they did it right before the Industrial Revolution. And it was slick, because what they did was they limited the education context so that they could make good workers in the steel mills. When somebody only knows steel and how to pour this or folds this and don't have anything beyond that particular intellectual constraint, he makes a good slave. Now, using the basic philosophy, and this comes from the Prussian-German education system, mind control. Using the basic philosophy prescribed in the duties of the state, combined with John Locke's view, which is in 1690, that children are a blank slate, and lessons from Rousseau on how to write on that slate, Prussia established a three-tiered education system that was considered scientific in nature. It began around 1807, and the system was in place by 1819. Now you have to listen carefully. Check the diabolical context and why it is that we are going through what we're going through today. An important part of the Prussian system was that it defined what what was to be learned, what was to be brought about, or what was to be thought about, how long to think about it, and when a child was to think of something else. Basically, it was a system of thought control, and it established a penchant in the psyche of the German elite that would later manifest itself into what we now refer to as mind control. The education system was divided into three groups. The elite of Prussian society were seen as comprising 5% of the society. Approximately 5.5 of the remaining children were sent to what was known as Redschulen, where they were partially taught to think. The remaining 94% were the Volksschulen, where they were to learn harmony, obedience, freedom from stressful thinking, and how to follow orders. An important part of this new system was to break the link between reading and the young child, because a child who reads too well becomes knowledgeable and independent of the system of instructions and is capable of finding out anything. In order to have an efficient policy-making class and a subclass beneath it, you've got to remove the power of most people to make anything out of the available information. Now, I bring it back to my opening statement. Is people listening to what I'm talking about? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not making any direct accusations, but I'm letting you understand that you can create a system or a ceiling to a person's awareness by taking away the different outlets and the different paths that they may pursue to make their own conclusions. Once you take away certain key information from someone, give them a base of information and a ceiling or a context of information by which to operate, that's all they know. That's all they know. This was the plan, to keep most of the children in the general population from reading for the first 6 to 7 years of their lives. Well, you say, well then, Reverend Valentine, what is all this about getting our children to read? They took it to the next harmonic. What are our children given to read? Even the stuff that they're reading now that has the quote-unquote cultural context involved. It's still about teaching our children to acclimate into the system, only having some sort of pseudo-identity. It does not teach the children to drop completely out. It does not give the children the 6 and 7 different levels necessary for them to learn. It teaches them how to conform, or at least gives them another clip in the ammunition for self-awareness. But that clip runs out, because after you've taken your own culture into this system, we have not taught our children what to do when they encounter the resistance to it. Where are the support mechanisms for them to go out and flourish based upon what we're teaching them? We still have to incorporate the system that is repressing us, but this time with our own identity. They have simply refined the madness. Now, the Prussian system of reading was originally a system whereby whole sentences, now dig the deviltry. The Prussian system of reading was originally a system whereby whole sentences, and thus whole integrated concepts, were memorized, rather than whole words. In this three-tiered system, they figured out a way to achieve the desired results. In the lowest category of the system, the Volks, Volks means people, the Volksschlusen, or the people school, I guess, the method was to divide whole ideas, which simultaneously integrate whole disciplines like math, science, language, culture, all at once, into subjects. which hardly existed prior to that time. The subjects were further divided into units, requiring periods of time during the day. What does that sound like? Sound like your education system, doesn't it? Listen carefully. With appropriate variation, no one would really know what was happening in the world. It was inherently one of the most brilliant methods of knowledge suppression that ever existed. They also replaced the alphabet system of teaching with the teaching of sounds. Hooked on phonics? Children could read without understanding what they were reading, or all the implications of what they were reading. In 1814, the first American, a Mr. Edward Everett, went to Prussia to get his Ph.D. He eventually became governor of Massachusetts. During the next 30 years or so, a whole line of American dignitaries came to Germany to earn degrees. Now, degrees is a German. That's that German. That's that, what's that, Brother Morris? The secret society came out of Germany. Not even Illuminati, but called it before that. The Freemasons, we know what I'm talking about. We'll get right to it. Horace Mann, instrumental in developing the education system in America, was amongst this group. Horace Mann was amongst the group that went over to Germany to learn the Prussian system, the three-tiered system. Those who earned degrees in Germany came back to the United States and staffed all of the major universities. In 1850, Massachusetts and New York utilized the system, as well as to promote the concept that the state is the father of the children. Hello? That's what welfare is. Horace Mann's sister, Elizabeth Peabody, Peabody Foundation. Anybody look at PBS? Okay? Peabody Foundation saw to it that after the Civil War, the Prussian system taught in the northern states was integrated into the conquered South between 1865 and 1900. By 1900, all the PhDs in the United States were trained in Prussia. This project also meant that one-room schoolhouses had to go. Couldn't have the ma and pa teaching the children anymore. Where did you hear that system before? No. Overseas, the great demon. Who's the great red demon? Russia. This is socialism. Karl Marx. Very good. One of the reasons that the self-appointed elite brought back the Prussian system to the United States was to ensure a non-thinking workforce to staff the growing industrial revolution. In 1776, for example, about 85% of the citizens were reasonably educated and had independent livelihoods. They didn't need to work for anyone. In 1840, the ratio was still about maybe 70%. The attitude of learn and then strike out on your own had to be broken. The Prussian system was an ideal way of doing that. One of the prime importers of the German educational system into the United States was William T. Harris of St. Louis. He brought the German system in and set the purpose of the schools to alienate children from parental influence and that of religion. Now they got the whole system in that your child can report on you if you want to put a whack on his backside. And nobody is rising up to revolt. The government just slowly takes away from you constantly, a little bit at a time, until you don't even know that you already built in a 6x6. He preached this openly, and he began creating school staffing programs that were immediately picked up by the new teacher colleges, many of which were underwritten by the Rockefeller family, the Carnegies, the Whitneys, and the Peabody family. The University of Chicago was underwritten by the Rockefellers. The bottom line is that we had a literate country in the United States before, well, they had it, before the importation of the German education system designed to dumb down the mass population. It was more literate than it is today. The textbooks of that time make such allusion to history, philosophy, mathematics, science, and politics that they are hard to follow today because the very people are not taught how to think, they are taught what to think. Now understand how diabolical this is, because the books that have the research material that we need so that we could put the missing ingredient of ourselves back into what was taken out, our children today can't read that stuff because the way the words are formed together to set 3 and 4 dimensions into your mind so that you can see yourself. The way these words are structured, you have to be educated in that other system to understand how they even hid the information. And very few brothers who are decoders, very few sisters who are interpreters have the ability to translate that information to our brothers and sisters. So if I am a decoder, it is my business to make sure that the young that I'm teaching, the young brothers and sisters who are now following in our paths, understand how they hid the information by understanding how to decode the system that was in place at the time they were hiding the information. That's why it's so easy to make anyone believe that if I stood up here long enough and started speaking from what I understood and what you, when you read, couldn't understand, it would make it look like I'm the one that's giving up all the spiritual context. It originated with me. It ain't originated with me. We have to start educating, or at least teaching, our children how to become decoders. Not just give them information to make them feel good. Not just make them think that they are gods. How did you become a god? You can walk around talking like you God, and by what you are even saying, you are causing destruction, madness. You are propagating your ignorance because you don't have the depth of study and research. And that's why I say to all my brothers and sisters who have influence over people, it is necessary to teach the people so that they understand how to teach themselves. Why do I say that? Because you see, every decoder or interpreter is actually interpreting for his or her time. And the genetic structure of the time is based upon the environment that he or she operates in. Now understand me carefully, follow me carefully. The environment wherein we operate now, all of us are operating under a genetic code that is similar, or we wouldn't be here. So that genetic code now is based upon how the environment shapes the genetics. And I'm not just talking about the physical environment, I'm talking about the internal dynamic as well as the environment of consciousness that is set by the one who is teaching. Okay? They always tell you, well, the problem is in the genes. Oh man, it's the genes, it's the genes. That's a lie. It's not the genes. It's what shapes the genes. Because scientists are only now finding out that the genes actually operate based upon how the environment dictates to the genes so that the genes change to meet the environment. You see what I'm saying? The genes can be malleable. They can be formed. So they say, well, what's evolution? Well, evolution comes beyond or from whatever God context is set up in the consciousness in light. The light now influences the genes to change in order for that body to evolve. But the genes don't change in and of themselves. That's divine mind. So what do? You set up a precedent where you don't teach nothing but you set up a ceiling of ignorance. So now the genes, which are automatically trying to evolve by themselves, are shutting down. All kinds of diseases are coming about. And you're wondering why people are going crazy. Their minds are flipping. It's because the genes want to break free. They wanted to shape the whole new body that's going to bring in the whole new information. But the ceiling is there. The ceiling is there. The other part of that is other decoders, which is the one that I think are the most progressive decoders that we have amongst us today, are the brothers of the Moorish nation. They are masters at decoding, because the beast has used all of his influence to hide his deviltry. And the brothers and sisters in the Moorish nation are about decoding that nonsense and using it as weapons against him, or at least as defense principles, so that we can fight a guerrilla warfare. But as it stands today, most of the brothers and sisters, not really most of them, but a few of the brothers and sisters who have the genius to decode, are not letting those brothers and sisters that they teach have the opportunity to go and decipher for themselves, to go and study inside of the words that they had studied. I have no such problem. I don't want you following me around asking me for do for you. You're going to do for yourself. And that's what I feel the great work is. Let me go one more further. The bottom line now was that part of this whole paradigm seems to originate from the idea presented in a book called The New Atlantis. You putting this down? The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon. This is in 1626, 1627. The work described a world research university that scans the planet for babies and talent. Check it. The state then becomes invincible because it owns the university and owns all of the talent. That's what talent is. If you look in the Roman things, a talent was money. So when they say you got talent, it means that you are a money-making entity, that what you do makes money. It becomes impossible to revolt against the state because the state now knows and owns everything. A reflection of this principle can be seen today with the suppression of radical and practical technologies in order to preserve state control of life and prevent evolution and independence. The New Atlantis was widely read by German mystics of the 19th century. By 1840 in Prussia, there were a whole lot of world research universities in concept all over the country, all of them drawing in talent and developing it for purposes of state power and stability. So all of your intellectual elite are given all kinds of monies and grants to maintain the system that's in place, the system of ignorance. Now, because your child represents, and the genes in your child represent the bursting forth of the new potential that you have left, in order to definitely make sure that your child is brought into the construct, they set up something known as experimental psychology. In the middle of the 19th century, Germany had developed a new concept in the sciences, which they termed psychophysics, which argued that people were in fact complex machines. It was the ultimate materialist extension of science that would parallel the mechanistic view of the universe already underway. This new view of people made more or less institutionalized in Germany, and by the 1870s, the field of experimental psychology was born. The ultimate purpose of experimental psychology was to discover the nature of the human machine and how to program it. The main proponent of this new experimental psychology in Germany was Wilhelm Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, who is today widely regarded as the father of experimental psychology. He is described by orthodoxy as having freed the study of the mind from metaphysics and rational philosophy. Freed the mind from metaphysics and rational philosophy. So there must be an irrational philosophy, brothers and sisters. Hello? If he's freeing you from one, he's obviously putting you into the other. Wundt obtained his PhD in medicine from the University of Heidelberg in 1856 and embarked on a study of sensory perception. His most famous work was Contributions to the Theory of Sense Perception. Get that work? Contributions to the Theory of Sense Perception, done in 1858. It is described by the orthodoxy as the first work of experimental psychology. In 1875, Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, was appointed to the chair in philosophy at Leipzig, where he instituted a laboratory for the systematic experimental study of experience. Check this out. He instituted a program for the systematic study of experience. That's deep. The study of experience. Back then, the phrase "get a life" was not in vogue, and evidently he didn't have much interpretable experience of his own. In 1873, he began a year-long writing project which resulted in, get this book, Principles of Physiological Psychology. Principles of Physiological Psychology, which became a classic that was subsequently reprinted through 6 editions over the next 40 years, establishing psychology's claim to be an independent science. Wundt also wrote a philosophical subjects such as logic and ethics, but as he did not describe to rational philosophy, his writings presumably yielded irrational interpretations in both areas. It is conceivable that his warped view of humanity and the universe contributed in some small way to the eventual Nazi penchant for experimenting on those they didn't like. The educational system expands. The wave of immigration, which began in 1848, combined with the visibility of revolutions taking place all over Europe, helped foster uncertainty in the public mind. Laws requiring compulsory schooling were then legislated. It was all very Hegelian. We wouldn't want the little tykes to become reactionaries, would we? He's being sarcastic. The implementation of the German educational nightmare in the United States met with some initial resistance. Now check this out. In Carnegie's hometown of Gary, Indiana, the system was implemented between 1910 and 1916. Now this is very important. Mostly through the efforts of William Wirt, the school's superintendent. It involved no academic endeavor whatsoever. It worked so well in supplying willing workers for the steel mills that it was decided by Carnegie to bring the system to New York City. In 1917, they initiated a program in New York in 12 schools with the objective of enlarging the program to encompass 100 schools and eventually all the schools of New York. William Wirt is the one who supervised that particular transaction. Unfortunately for Carnegie, and listen well, unfortunately for Carnegie, the population of the 12 schools were predominantly Jews who innately recognized what was being done and the nature of the new education system. There's no innately recognized. They knew the system. And the elite from their own came to New York. You understand? Check it. 3 weeks of rioting followed. Now you understand how change happens? 3 weeks of rioting followed, and the editorials of the New York Times were very critical of the plan. Over 200 Jewish school children were thrown in jail. The whole political structure of New York that had tried this scheme were then thrown out of office during the next election. A book describing this scenario, carefully, listen, The Great School Wars by Diane Ravitch. Listen, get these books. By Diane Ravitch. Curiously, William Wirt, check it out, William Wirt was committed to an insane asylum about 1930. After going around making public speeches about his part in the large conspiracy to bring about a controlled state of mind on certain people. He was killed 2 years later. In order to make sure that the independence of the one-room schoolhouse and the pension for communities to hire their own independent teachers would cease. My brothers and sisters, I came from a space where it was a little one-room schoolhouse. And my mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunts, all of them knew the teacher because my aunt was the teacher. And they taught you what they wanted you to learn. not what you had to learn in order to pass and get into the next phase. You get a book called The Unseen Hand. And in that book, it tells you how the education system was systematically taken from mom and pop and put into the hands of the state. No one knew that the communist revolutions were funded from the United States. The buildup of the Soviet Union as well as Nazi Germany would also be funded later from the United States in order to get a reactionary public to bend to the will of the controlling political factions. It was a plan that worked so well in the 1920s and worked so well again in the 1950s in the psychological creation of the Cold War, providing funding for the buildup of military, industrial, and the pharmaceutical complex. The non-thinking American public never suspected a thing. Because the United States was owned by wealthy businessmen, a synthetic free enterprise system was created. A synthetic free enterprise system. They tell you it's free enterprise, but it ain't. A synthetic free enterprise system was created, and antitrust laws were passed to prevent anyone else from gaining power. So if you had a great idea, the state would own it. Because if you, that's why they're going after Bill Gates now. Check it. The white boy stumbled on something, and he's cornered the market on communication, which is what they need for the next controlling ceiling of the new paradigm. You see what I'm saying? Earlier in the century, there were no school boards in every town. Between 1932 and 1960, the number of school boards dropped from 140,000 to 30,000. Today there are about 15,000, all controlled by extensions of the Carnegie-Rockefeller education complex. In 1959, with the advent of the Sputnik and the public realization that another country was ahead of us, the embarrassed educational system was forced to temporarily create a synthetic focus on science, which produced a generation, one generation, of scientists and technicians in order to resolve the apparent deficit of the public mind. That is why they are pushing you and your children to start adopting the technology of computers. You see, computers don't need to be thinking 3 and 4 dimensions. They'll have the computer learn how to think 3 and 4 dimensions. You just push a button. So now you understand why I did a preface at the beginning of this, that none of this information belongs to me. The interpretation belongs to me. The facts that I use as my base so that I may grow a flower of realization in you so that you may use that as your base to follow back where I got mine from to get your own flower growing. That's what I'm about. That's what I'm about. Now, I had said that I'm going to start off with the habits of death. Now, what is the habits of death? Habits of death is exactly what it is that we pursue every day. We don't realize that we are in a syndrome of death. The very thought process that we use, the very actions that we unconsciously partake in are the habits of death. Let us go outside right now and look at the way they look the types of foods they put into our communities. And they have created a habit of death. There are non-foods. There's no foods in our community that you could walk out into. Everything is in a box. Were you born in a box, brothers and sisters? No, so your food should never come from a box. It should come from what nature herself gives to you. Now, the reason why we are so susceptible to disease is because we don't even walk on the dirt anymore. Do you realize that the biology of the human structure and the biology of the planet are synergistically linked in such a way that the mother continuously feeds us? But now we have blocked her. We have systematically isolated ourselves from her, and we are taking in artificial forms of agitation. This is an artificial form of agitation. This is not real light. So what does the body have to do? It has to genetically structure itself to this pathological environment that we are working in. What does that do? It then systematically limits our ability to organically interface with the properties necessary for us to establish our next paradigm. That is, Nature Mother herself. We need to go into the forest, we need to go into the nature of things and let that instrument, let that technology talk to us directly. We have lost that link. And what do we link into now? We go into the computers. And we look into computers. Do you know what them computers are doing to you, brothers and sisters? They're making you crazy. First of all, your eye, if you work at a terminal, do you realize that your eye goes through 30,000 adjustments just in that day? That's unnatural. Why? Because the pixels on the computer are in such a way that the edges of the words are faded, and the light comes from the middle of the letter or the word, and you have to adjust the eye around the faded edges instead of it being stark. Like I could look at these words here, and they have a clear outline that I could read. Even though it's one-dimensional or two-dimensional, I can still focus one way. But with the pixelation, and you constantly using words that you have to switch screens, your eyes are constantly trying to adjust because the words are not stark. They don't have edges for you to immediately focus in on. So if they're almost invisible, your eyes are trying to focus on the faded part to get a definition for the part that isn't faded so that you can make out the word. By the time that happens, you have used up so much vitamin A in your body that your eyesight is going. And this is even more important for my sisters, because once you start using up the vitamin A in your body, your estrogen goes completely out of your body. Estrogen is dependent largely on vitamin A, as well as the lecithin and the boron. Boron maintains the estrogen integrity. But if you are using your eyes, my sisters, to do any enormous amounts of reading, or you're using into computers to deal with two-dimensional letters. See, the eyes, brothers and sisters, were meant to process three-dimensionality. God didn't write no word for you to read instructions. Your instructions are already encoded on your DNA. Everything that you are studying outside is already imprinted inside. Most of the education that you're doing and most of the research you're doing is just reference points to what you already know. But if you are constantly using your eyes, sisters, because in the past you didn't read, you already knew, you felt. And most of the education that our sisters did, or I don't even use that word education, we got to find another word. Most of the learning that our sisters did was based on the griot principle. Because the eyes for reading and what you sacrificed as a result caused a deficit to the femininity that you had. This is why a lot of our sisters, with the lack of proper distribution of vitamin A, are ending up with the fibroid tumors, are ending up with the breast cancers. Why is it that in the last 30 years of the feminist inquisition, that female diseases have jumped 150%? My sisters, you cannot adopt to this particular system, because this system was inspired, thought of, and orchestrated, structured, and designed around a male purview. This whole design was masculine. So automatically, by psychic affinity, they would structure something to suit them. You now have not come to refocus and change it so that it's more adaptability to your physiology. You are just adapting his. So now if you have to do what he does, your body has to mutate. You have to create a hell of a lot more testosterone. When you create testosterone, what happens? You imbalance your estrogen. And of all my sisters and who have come to see me, and 85% of the people who come to see me are sisters, all of them have fibroid tumors, and all of them have some indication of testosterone overload. And this is the sadness, because I see it. The hair starts growing in places that they're not supposed to be growing. Specific problems that could only happen because of testosterone toxicity. It's called hyperandrocity. in the technical terms. This is what's happening today. Now, when you destroy the feminine principle by having her have to survive by adopting masculine principles, what do you do to the next generation? Notice our young sisters who have their hips, they don't have the hips anymore. Straight. Notice our brothers having more breasts. This is not something that you should be ashamed of. What it is that we have been operating in ignorance for so long. We have had to adopt to a paradigm that was meant for our destruction, that was meant to keep us below the ceiling of our potential. And they have set our potential levels by setting the level of our knowledge and the level of the information that should be disseminated amongst us. Now, I'm going to be speaking about the habits of health, which is essentially what our sisters are doing and even what our brothers are doing too. We are eating incorrectly and above all thinking incorrectly. We have no clue as to who we are, so we don't have the understanding of that so that we may change the genetic structure of our present knowledge base, because knowledge base comes from a change in genetic structure. The genetic structure changes based upon experience. If I am reading and I don't know what I'm reading, I can't experience what is being conveyed to me. You can give experience vicariously. That's why reading and understanding knowledge is so important. Even if you're not reading, if you are studying based upon a teacher who is there to make sure that you are becoming greater than he. If I can't teach my younger brothers and sisters to surpass me, then I am contributing to the paradigm that keeps us locked down. My younger brothers over there should be greater than I by the time he reaches, should be surpassing me and then taking this as the base of my information and then zooming to the next time zone with it. But if you have people that's teaching you to be for them, or you are propping yourself up as the conveyor or the purveyor of the information, then that sets a precedent of confusion. Because now you are the only one they look to. And that's dangerous. Because then anyone else who has information that may corroborate, if that one person or those persons don't say the same thing, then they're not believed. The people caught up in that paradigm won't look outside of that paradigm. No more ceilings. No more ceilings. So what I want to do to interface with you now is to get into your needs. I make sure that you come to see me. I want to answer your questions so that when you leave, you can follow through. If there is something that you wish to talk about based on health, I'm here. Now, you know there's certain questions you want to ask about yourself, and yeah, I'm a little embarrassed, and I want to talk about it. I may want to just whisper in your ear, even though we're alone. But we can talk about this. Anything beyond this point, you know you pay for. So ask me good questions. Yes, beloved.
What's the deal with uropathy? I just came across that information and I'm starting to get into it.
Beautiful.
I need you to disseminate some information so the masses will know.
Definitely. Uropathy is a science that goes back to the beginning, when the idea of disease first came in. Disease is an idea. Disease essentially is something that you yourself believe can happen. Disease starts in a thought and then filters down as a reality. We create our conditions. Uropathy is the usage of urine in your therapy. Now, all of us who are old enough know our grandmothers and great-grandmothers have been using this urine for countless centuries, and again, they done took our science and they get ready to run with it and make it into this big hoopla. But the science of uropathy has been around a long time. I'm going to give you a specific tincture that you could use. Now, in the morning times is the best time to catch the urine, especially if you have a problem. If you have a problem with a cold, if you're having a problem with headaches, if you are having like skin rashes, nausea, if you have what is called an infection, if you have what they call syphilis or venereal diseases, if you got AIDS, if you got cancer, you can use uropathy. Why? Because uropathy is the usage of the materials that your body's own intelligence created to heal itself. Let me repeat that. Uropathy is using the materials that divine intelligence created to heal and sustain itself. The vaccination idea came from that. But what they do is use the filthy byproducts of cows and horses and God knows what else. So your urine is biologically safe for usage. Matter of fact, if you were in the military and you were in Air Force pilot training school, fighter school, if you crashed in enemy territory, the first thing they said and the first thing they got in the pilot's thing is a way for the pilot to collect his own urine. The urine has properties, enzymes, and so-called white blood cells. It has albumin and different proponents of the blood that the blood will recognize immediately as a tonic because the blood created that particular essence to heal itself. So by the principle, homeopathic principle of using one poison to get rid of another poison, you use the poison that the body created as its own byproduct back into itself. The body recognizes it as a healing potion, and boom, you start healing up. You wonder where the canker sores went? Oh, yes, it does. You put it on your skin, it does wonders for your skin. Yes, you do. So uropathy is very important, especially since we are going into the next paradigm where it's going to be rough for the next, say, 20 years. You ain't going to be able to get a hospital bed for under $5,000. So your hospital bed better be your bed where you laying down. And you have certain things in there. As a matter of fact, I'm ready to get ready to drop some places and resources where you can start picking up things for you to store. Water, dry goods, and so forth. I'm going to give you that in a little while. But collect your urine, the middle portion of your urine, the first urine of the morning. You could drink that straight down. The only thing that's wrong with that is the idea. Oh my God, no, I can't believe I'm doing this. And ain't nobody in the room with you. You start looking and saying, wait a minute, I got to rethink this. You know, I know Brother Valentine, you know, he got good intentions, but damn. But what you got to do is to understand that the reality is that is a homeopathic tincture. Now, what you can do is you can attenuate it and even accelerate its potency by taking maybe a small bottle, a decanter, a small decanter. Make sure it's brown or dark or blue, something to filter out the waves, the light waves. And you take about 2 or 3 tablespoons to fill it up, depending on how large it is. Then with the eyedropper, you take about 4 to 5 drops of the middle portion of your urine and put it into that bottle along with that purified, sterilized, or distilled water. Make sure it's boiled. But you can't use tap water, you can't use them other waters. Try to get it as refined as possible. Then you take about 4 or 5 drops of the of gin or vodka, the purest you can. Drop about 4 or 5 in there. I'm giving you a tincture for you to get rid of all that stuff that you might have, canker, if you got a herpes, all of that. You take that, drop it in, and then close it down and shake it for about 20 minutes. You get tired in one hand, do it in the other. Just keep doing it. What you're doing is you're potentizing it. If you want, you could put it under a pyramid as well. If you want, you could put a crystal inside of it. Then what you do is every day you took about 3 or 4 drops under the tongue every hour, and in a day or 2, I guarantee, whatever that ailment is, you will see a marked reverse on it. And this goes for open sores that come from, say, herpes. Now, let me give you an idea of what disease is, so you don't, and whenever, like, sisters get the discharges, or brothers say, well, you know, on the other side, on the side here, right there by the groin, there's a swelling there. Doc, what is that? And all of a sudden, there's There's this sore that's on the side, and it's like, oh my God, I'm dying, and syphilis, and can't even put my drawers on. I gotta walk funny and sit funny. Well, what's happening is that the body uses the weakest part to get rid of its waste. Now, if you're doing the wild thing constantly, you are creating what is known as a thermal, you are losing the thermal integrity of the area. See, this area keeps a certain temperature constant. And that temperature constant maintains the bacterial proliferation. There are certain bacteria that already exist in this area, such as the spirochete, which scientists in Western medicine say creates or causes syphilis. That's a lie. No bacteria causes any disease. Bacteria are very frail, but they are malleable. They are malleable in that they can change in accordance with the environmental conditions set for them. And that's the beauty and the intelligence of the body. If you are causing a thermal breakdown in this area, it means that this area cannot sustain the proper balance of bacteria, which means that the area cannot get rid of the waste that collects in this area. Your body is constantly filtering waste in this area because this is an outlet for the lymphatic system. Now, if there is a thermal breakdown, it means that the lymphatic system cannot take waste past this area efficiently enough. So when the waste collects, the little bacteria gets signals from the hypothalamus and from the pituitary, and it says, oh man, I got to get to work and get rid of all this filth. My boy be eating all this chicken and fried this and all this crap and all this sugar and this garbage. And right now, he's so weak because he's doing the wild thing all the time, then going out and eating Mickey D burgers, and he's drinking this and he's doing all these things. Now what you have to do is, okay, what you got to do, all right, send down signals to these little bacteria to start eating. So the little bacteria starts to eat up all the waste and filth. That's what they subsist upon. Bacteria only eats on the dead material that's there. They don't eat on live material. You understand what I'm saying? So what happens is if the material far out or exceeds the bacterial presence, what does the bacteria have to do? Multiply. So now in comes the vaunted medical scientist, and he takes a pap and he draws your blood, and oh, you got this. Oh, you got problems. He's looking for certain, protocol criterias. What he's essentially looking at is the end result of a process. He's not looking at the cause of the process. Medical science looks at a pile of garbage, sees flies around it, and believes that the flies brought the garbage. You get the scenario? So he in there, he looking at all these germs, and he looking at all this crap, and he's saying, well, wow, look at all these germs, man. You got all these problems. These germs are causing your problems. No, they're not. They're there trying to fight the problem that you instigated in your ignorance. So now the more you eat, the more you act stupid, the more germs, so-called, quote, have to multiply in order to deal with your stupidity. Now what happens is, because the integrity is broken down, the body has to get rid of this waste as efficiently as possible, because the conduits that normally get rid of that waste, which is your intestinal system, your alimentary tract, is blocked. You're constipated. Now the body has to use other ways to get rid of it. What does it do? It opens up the sore at the surface of the what do you call it? And it starts getting rid of all that garbage. And you say, oh my God, look at that. I'm dying. The doc gives you something, he shoots you up with antibiotics or some other garbage that comes out of his ballistic arsenal. And what he does is repress your body's own intelligent reaction to your stupidity. Check? Am I going too fast? Please stop me. Say, wait, that don't sound right. And I'm praying that this is related. I want this tape because I'm gonna chock this tape full so that my brothers and sisters at least can take it home and just get to schooling. Get the young ones in front of it. Let them start taking notes and going back to their teacher. Start agitating. Start arguing with the teacher. They kicked me out of class a bunch of times because sometimes something inside of me just said, that just don't sound right. And that's what I want them to be, warriors in class. Well, wait a minute, teacher. I was told that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, how do you verify it? I got the books on that. In the books of so-and-so and so and so-and-so, it says this so-and-so. Could you imagine what the teacher would be doing? Backing up and having to do her own research. So the child shall be the teacher to the man. Brother had his hand up first. Well, yeah, they also